YouTubers, this is Joe from ArtAlienTV. Got a real interesting one for you today. The spiders of Mars. Now, I'm just coming up with some ideas here which have not really been put out there, I don't think, enough by anybody, as far as I know. And I've got lots of stuff up here. I've got lots of articles. And I'm going to link these images to some other things that I've found and some other ideas that I've been thinking about for quite some time. And these are what look like spiders on Mars. Now, these black marks can be seen in many of these satellite images of the Mars surface, right? Especially in the polar regions, where we have ice dunes, so-called ice dunes, lots of ice and frozen material on the ground. It's permafrost. Now, when we zoom out of this image, it's very interesting because we have these square parts to this. And I don't actually think that the structures that these are growing on are entirely natural. Okay? And I have done videos on this area before. But basically, what we have here are what NASA calls spiders. And here's an article by NASA called Jamming with the Spiders from Mars. And this is a similar area. It's not the same area, but it's very similar. And these appear all over the surface of Mars, especially in the polar regions where it's very cold. And the explanation for these is that they're caused by carbon dioxide bubbling up from just below the surface. And as it evaporates, it leaves behind these black scars. Now, that's perfectly logical. Now, let me show you this again. Right? I don't think that's entirely what's going on here. Because if you look closely, you can actually see what look like life forms here in the ice. Right? And next to them, we have all these black marks, which are caused by carbon dioxide. Okay? I'm going with the carbon dioxide for now. That's good. I like that. It makes sense, right? Now, is it possible that these black marks are caused by these other things here? Right? Now, according to NASA, these are caused by gas bubbling up from just below the surface and then eventually outgassing and causing these marks. But if you look carefully, a lot of these marks don't really correspond exactly with where these spider type creature things are, okay? This one here's got one on it. This one here has got the mark next to it, okay? This is very strange. And you would logically think if these black marks were caused by these, which are supposedly caused by gas coming up from below the surface, then these would be round. They wouldn't have necessarily have all these legs on them, right? And you would expect the point of most stress, if the bubble was building up under the surface, would be the center. So these should be round, if anything, or ovoid at least, but like bubbles in a cake or in a liquid or in a drink, for instance, in an alcoholic drink, right? But they don't necessarily correspond. So we've got these black marks, and then we've got these millions of what look like spider-like creatures, which in fact, if you look at them up close, I'll show you some of these up close in here. I've enhanced this a bit. I've enhanced the contrast so they stand out a bit more. And you can see that they've got what looks like a roundish body. There's a good one here. And multiple limbs. Now, these to me look like starfish or urchins, sea urchins. They're quite large. They're very large, in fact. Some are much larger than others. They're averaging about 30 meters in the actual body, with the limbs much bigger than that. So if you count the limb size as well, they're averaging around 50, 60, 70 meters. Some of them are much bigger, but the average size, I would say, is that. Now, there's a load over here, and they're in clusters often, right? There's a whole load over here. There's some nice ones here. Some of them are much bigger. Okay, that's a large one there. So these, I think, are possibly plants. I don't think they're necessarily starfish. Now here's a picture of a starfish, right? Now starfish usually have 5 limbs, some have 7, some have 9, they have all sorts. I'll link all this stuff up below, right? This one's got multiple limbs. There are 1,800 types of starfish, probably over 1,800 types of starfish or species, and they don't all just have 5 legs, they can grow up to 50, okay? I thought that was interesting. Maybe nothing to do with what we're looking at, but the shape is similar, right? And there are many sea creatures that look very similar to the things we're looking at today on Earth, with multiple limbs, things like sea urchins and starfish and that kind of thing. And they're a sort of primitive life form, obviously, which are somewhere between plants and animals, okay, because they have attributes of both, some of these things. What I think's happening here is fermentation. Now, what if these are plants that are growing below the surface? Now, they may be crawling plants. In other words, they may be able to move around like sea urchins do and crawl around on the surface or just below the surface, right? Is that possible? Maybe. There are many types of creatures on Earth that live in ice. Most of them are microbial. Now, I've got some articles up here which I'm going to flick through. Now, let's start with this one here. There are many types of animals on Earth that can survive being completely frozen. And as long as they're defrosted in a sort of natural way, they come back to life. Here's a bunch of animals on this page. 6 animals can freeze and then come back to life. Right? The wood frog, this one here, this can freeze and come back to life. The Arctic woolly bear caterpillar, this can freeze and come back to life. All these can freeze and come back to life. There's a whole bunch of these things. Painted turtle hatchlings, these can also freeze. Now, obviously, these are more primitive creatures like reptiles and that kind of thing, and insects, right? Iguanas also, yeah, that's another type of reptile. There's one there that's sort of frozen. Okay. The darkling beetle, there's loads of different types of creatures. This is only 6 of them, right, on Earth, that can freeze and come back to life. There are loads and loads of those, lots of different types of frogs and toads and that kind of thing, amphibians, insects, reptiles, that kind of thing, but also plants. Now, I've got an article up here about antifreeze protein. Now, in order to freeze something, in other words, if you were living on the surface of Mars, it would be very beneficial for you to have an antifreeze protein in your blood, in your cells, right? Because when ice forms, it often forms fairly quickly and crystallizes. And unfortunately for you, if you were being frozen rather quickly and then defrosted, your cells would be so damaged that you would be basically, there'd be nothing left of you to worth be defrosting. In other words, your brain cells and a lot of your body's cells will be damaged in the process of freezing and defrosting. But if you contain an AFP or antifreeze protein in your system, whether you're a plant, a person, or an animal, whatever, if you were to have antifreeze proteins, and here's one here, this thing here, if you were to have this in your system, in your cells or in your blood or whatever, this would prevent the ice crystals from actually damaging your cells, and you'll be able to then be defrosted and come back to life. Okay, this is how they do it. Not only that, these creatures and plants especially contain chemicals like alcohol or ethanol, which is a type of antifreeze because of its lower freezing temperature. Now, you can obviously prove this by getting a bottle of vodka and put it in the freezer. It won't freeze. If it's decent vodka or decent other spirits of any kind, it won't freeze. It will thicken, but it won't freeze, okay? And I'm not saying that vodka contains an antifreeze protein. It doesn't. It's just got lots of alcohol in it. And the more alcohol you have in something, the lower the freezing temperature, right? So is it possible that there are types of starfish-like plants or creatures on Mars that contain antifreeze proteins that are crawling around in the ice and snow on the surface? Is that possible? Is that what we're looking at here? I think it is possible. Now, this is also related, I think, these may well be related to the things I've shown before. Let's have another quick close look at those before we move on. These look like animals or plants here, and they may be causing the carbon dioxide. Now, if these are plants, I hear you ask, why are they giving out carbon dioxide and making these black stains? Well, I think they're fermenting. I don't think they're breathing in oxygen and then breathing out carbon dioxide, although they could be. Because on Earth, it's the other way round. Plants consume carbon dioxide and exhume oxygen. But is it possible that there's a reverse process going on here on Mars, where organisms and plants are actually doing the other way round, which could explain the high levels of methane and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere of Mars, which is 95 or 6% carbon dioxide. Now on Earth, we don't even have 1%. So those people that are trying to put taxes on carbon on Earth are really taking the piss. So is it possible that these are actually plants or creatures that are breathing out carbon dioxide, and these black stains are a result of that? That is also possible, right? But I think there's something else going on here. I think that these plants are fermenting and breaking down and creating alcohol and gas. Much like when you make champagne, right? When champagne is made on Earth, you have sugars and yeast, and the byproduct is carbon dioxide. I think the byproduct of these plants or creatures under the surface, when they die off, I think they're fermenting and causing outgassing of carbon on the surface here, which leaves these black stains. Okay, that's what I think it is. So I think this is proof of life. I don't think these black stains are actually life. I think this is caused by the outgassing of rotting life forms, which are just below the surface here, right? Which are a type of crawling plant, perhaps. You could call them urchins or plants or whatever, starfish, star plants. I kind of like the word star plants, right? There's millions of them here, and the ones in this corner are the best ones. They're the most clear, and if you've got a magnifier like I've got here, you can really look at them quite closely, and you can see these limbs coming off. They look like plants, okay, and they're in clusters like plants would grow, or urchins on the bed of the sea, perhaps. That's what they look like. I could be wrong here. This is just a theory, but bear in mind what I've shown before with images like this, where we have what look like giant fruit or gourd type vegetables on the surface. Now these grow, or seem to be growing on the surface. These are massive, right? 130 meters across, some of these, right? Well, most of them are about 100, right? Some are smaller, some are bigger. There are double ones. They seem to grow into pairs, and then they send out runners between them, and they grow in long lines, right? Some here, which I've shown before as well. These are in black and white. But you can see here where we have them multiplying, right? So we've got these giant fruit-like gourd things. Some people call them tomatoes because they look red. If you look at this one, they look red here, so they do look a bit like tomatoes, but they're not, right? You've got these roots coming out. Now these roots join them up, they go into the ground, and sometimes along the ground. Most of the time, these roots seem to go into the ground and join them up in long lines. And we have groups of them like this, right? And you can see here, we've got a twin one here. It seems that the twin ones are the ones that are breeding or multiplying. And then they send runners out, and then more of them multiply from those runners. We've got a runner coming out of this one, like a root runner, goes along the ground and joins to these, which are then joined to each other, right? Then we have another one here joining up. We have this one here, which is sending out a runner to this one, okay? These aren't dunes. There's no way these are dunes. You can actually see the leafy sort of root-like structures coming out of one end of them and joining each other up. And there's a whole bunch of them joined up here. And what happens then, of course, is the sand blows along and then collects on these. You can see a row of them here, which are separate here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then they're starting to join up here, right? Where it looks like sand is blown over them, or they're mutating or morphing, right? They're not all exactly round. Some are sort of longer, some are rounder, right? So it looks like they're morphing into great big long dune-like structures, right? As we can see here, look almost like a runner bean type of thing with pods. They got pods inside. There's one here, one here, one here, one here. We've got 3 or 4 there in a row, but they're joined up. They look almost like runner beans. Okay? Really interesting. That is a really cool one. You can actually see the pods, like a pea pod. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're like giant peas or something. So they're mutating from what look like single kind of gourd-like fruit into whole rows of them joined together. Now, I'm not saying they're necessarily joined with sand. These may be a slightly different type here, which are longer. Who knows? But these look organic. Now, if these are organic, and I think they are, the chances are that these contain water and sugars, because they have flesh, probably fleshy material inside. Now, when they die, what would happen? These would ferment and create alcohol. If these were, say, these may be quite new, these may be only a year or 2 years old, who knows? I don't know how old these are, right? These may be only a year or 2 old. Now, after a couple of years, they may start to die off. Now, what would happen if they were starting to die off and then they were covered in sand and then ice formed on the sand, and then these started to ferment below the ice, the frosty dune kind of sand, right? What would happen? You would have a build-up of gases from the fermentation process as they rotted down. You would have alcohol forming. You would have then, if they're anything like the fruit and vegetables we have on Earth, like the grapes have, they have a type of dust on the grape, on the outside of the grape, which has got a type of fungus in it, right? And that fungus in the skin, on the skin, is what helps the fermentation process when you make wine, okay? Now, it's very possible, like we have here, when you make cider also, with apples, the skin itself is what contains the yeast-like fungus that is imperative to making alcohol, because you need that to start the process and react with the sugars, the natural sugars that are in the fruit, okay? And then you would have a build-up of gas. Now, if these were covered in ice and sand, or sand then ice, and frozen over, like we may have here, now I'm not saying these are the same, but there are other examples I've got. If these were frozen over, sand blows over them, then they freeze over, right? And then As they ferment, they would create gas and bubbles, like you would get in champagne or in cider, when you make cider or other types of alcohol. And basically this would bubble up underneath the ice, right? And then eventually come through the ice, and as it hit the atmosphere, it would cause these dark, blackish stains on the surface, okay? And we can see them here. Now, what these stains, I've been trying to work, I've been looking at these images for a while now. I published this initially a few weeks ago, and I've been trying to work out what these black marks are. I think these are caused by where there were previous fruit or vegetables, whatever they are, under the on or in the surface, like these are in the permafrost, which have died off, and this is what was left behind by the ones that were there before. They died off, they rotted, and then as a byproduct of that, they formed alcohol, and then carbon dioxide was formed in that process as a waste product, and then formed a stain or mark on the ground. So what I think basically is that these are living, and these black marks next to them are what's left by the ones that were living here before. Now what they probably do is they probably live for a year or two. A year on Mars is almost 2 Earth years, okay? And then they die off. When it gets extremely cold in the winter, they die off. And as they die off, they're sort of half in the ground. As they die off, they leave these scars behind, right? So these scars on the ground are caused by them dying off, and then maybe the next year they come back to life, or one would grow next to it, like you get with fungi. You have a patch of fungi, and when it dies off, it grows back next to that patch it was before, okay? Right next to it. So they come back year on year, or every couple of years, whatever, in the same area, and you see the scars in the frosty ground, the permafrosty ground, here, where there were previous fruit or gourds or whatever they are, okay? That's a working theory. I can't prove it yet, but that's what it looks like to me. And some of these are really, really cool. I mean, this one here, look at this. It's got an eye-like structure here. If you look at that with a magnifier, look at this one. There's no way that's a dune. Absolutely no way. And they've got spikes on them. Look really carefully, or hairs, right? See these? Spines, or little spines or hairs. Since when do sand dunes have spines or hairs on them? See, when you get close enough to these things, you can really see what's going on, okay? I do recommend this, as I've said before, I do recommend this magnifier. It's called Hover Zoom, okay? Magnifying glass, Hover Zoom. Look it up. If you're using Google Chrome, look it up. Chrome extension. Right, so these are not dunes. When you look at them really closely, now this one here, unfortunately, you can only see the edge of it here. This one here is a double one which is joined up here, the vine joining them up, and then the runner coming out. Now this one corresponds to this one over here. This is the same one, okay? The same area. This image is bigger and it covers more of it. That was only a strip of this image put in colour. That's the same pair here, with the vine joining them and the vine or runner coming out along here. It's the same one, okay? That pair. It's just from a different angle, from the other angle, and unfortunately we can only see that part of it, and the image is cut off here. But look at this one. This one is the giveaway. It has spines on it, or hairs. Dunes do not have spines or hairs growing on them. Look at them. And look at this structure here. So these are a life form. These die off in the autumn or in the winter. As winter sets in, they get covered in sand. That then freezes over, and then they ferment, creating alcohol, which may even be drinkable, right? And then, because these probably contain antifreeze, like I was talking about earlier, already, a type of antifreeze, so they've probably got quite a certain level of alcohol in them anyway. But when it gets really cold in the winter, they probably die off and they ferment, creating outgassing, which then causes these black marks on the ground. And I think there are probably many, many types of these on Mars. This particular type are red, they look a bit like tomatoes or something. But look at this. I mean, there's absolutely no way this. Look at this structure here. This is a plant, right? Look at that. And then we have the black mark next to it, right? So it's almost as if this is outgassing already, even though it's not dead yet. It's outgassing carbon through this vent or nipple-like structure here, okay? Right? So this is what's causing these black marks. There's another one here, look. This has also got a black mark right on that structure there, okay? You got the structure here, and then a black hole or something like a mark. And there's the remains of another one down here, which is called kind of rotten, right? So this looks like one that was growing here before and has died off, and then this one's sprouted. So this is probably an ongoing process. I think a lot of these black marks we're seeing on the surface are caused by life forms, not just giant gourd-like things like that, but different types of life forms, right? And these are a different type altogether here. I'm not saying these are the same. These look more like spiders. This is what they're called. That's what NASA calls them. These are possibly crawling very slowly around on the surface, right? They live in the melt zones where there's water in the northern hemisphere on Mars. But these are not far from those fruit I just showed you, these giant fruit or gourds. They're all in a similar sort of latitude on Mars, okay? So that's what I think is going on. And, you know, I mean, this also possibly means that these have contained alcohol, and this just says here, these microscopic fungi extract the energy from sugar using a process called fermentation and produce alcohol and carbon dioxide as waste, okay? That's what happens when we make booze on Earth. The waste product is carbon dioxide. It also, like I said before in the previous video, it also may explain the spikes in methane on the surface as these break down and die off, okay? So the black marks are possibly caused by outgassing as these ferment. The black marks, which are around them here, right? As they're fermenting, they create carbon dioxide as a waste product, but they also probably produce quite a lot of methane as they rot, as well as carbon. So a mixture of things are going on here, and that may be causing the methane spikes on the surface of Mars, which have been picked up on a yearly basis in the autumn, okay, by the Mars rovers. They picked up these gases. This is happening. There's methane probably caused by living matter dying off on a yearly basis, and there's probably many, many different types of these things on the ground. Some of them are giant, like we have here. These look like giant fruit or vegetables on the ground, and some of them kind of end up in long lines, like runner beans, like I just showed you, and some of them look like spiders or plants under the surface or in the permafrost, right? Like we got there. Lots of things going on here. And are there spiders on Mars? Well, there are certainly crabs on Mars. Look at this one. This is a giant crab. There we are. Just to show you something from the ground rather from above. This has multiple limbs and is holding something. Absolutely insane. Now, this looks like it's fossilized, or preserved at least. It's got multiple limbs here. 1, 2, 3. There's one around the other side. There's probably got 4 on each side. So this may be a crab. It may be an insect. It could only have 3 either side. So there's just some weird stuff on Mars, right? And I've shown lots of these things before. That there are crabs or fossilized crabs on the surface. Multiple remains of humanoids and wreckage all over the place. Architecture everywhere. But we also have, seen from space, what look like giant spiders. Now these are, like I said, these are about 50, 60 meters across on average, right? And they're leaving these dark stains. Why? Because I think there is living creatures in the ice, below the ice, and on the surface. When they die off, they ferment and they outgas. And they outgas carbon, which leaves a dark stain, and they also outgas methane, which is picked up by the Mars rovers on the ground on a yearly basis, and that may be causing these spikes in various gases like methane on the surface, okay? Absolutely insane. And these things, you've really just got to look at them, and there's absolutely no way, when you look at them up close, that these are just dunes. Absolutely no way. These are living organisms with hairs and spines sticking out. Look at this structure here. Unbelievable. Right? And this one here. I mean, there's another one here, look. And you can see the black mark right on the edge where this kind of structure is, right? Like I showed you. And there's a dead one here, it seems, which has left a black mark. So they're rotting down and leaving these black stains on the ground, which is probably from the gas as they deteriorate, and would also cause methane and alcohol. Many of these things on the surface probably contain alcohol. Now this one that's really hairy, if you look closely, it's transparent around the edge. This is hair. It's got hair around it, right? There's a lot of detail here. These aren't dunes. Some really amazing examples here. I mean, I could go on and on showing you these all day long. They're absolutely incredible, and they're mesmerizing. There's a double one here, look. This will probably end up splitting off, like I showed the other one did, into two, and then would then breed or send runners off, and then more would grow from that. Like this one up here, where it's split into two. So we've got different stages of growth, and they're multiplying, and they're sort of joined up together, and they kind of start off as one, then they split into two like this, and then they go into like a heart-shaped one, like that one, right? Let me see if I can find that on here, like this one, and then they send these runners off, which then also multiply, and then we've got these like runner bean type ones, and look at that one. Absolutely insane. And then you'll find that there are smaller ones growing inside that as well, just like runner beans or pea pods. Okay, look at this one. This one's really long. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we got 9 pods inside that one. So we got loads of them growing in rows. Absolutely insane. There's another bunch down here. There's a load of them here, right? That's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a whole bunch inside that one. Absolutely insane. So there's some complex biology going on here, I would say. And I think these are most definitely life forms. They're not just sand dunes. And the black marks and the spiders are similar in this other image. And I think are caused by a similar process of outgassing, of fermenting and perhaps rotting material just below the surface, in this case, causing the black, dark, spider-like fans. NASA call them fans, right? Fans, yeah, whatever. But they don't exactly correspond, a lot of them, to the structures underneath. So I think these are moving. Or some of them are living, and where they're dying off, they're outgassing here. And they're probably chucking out loads of spores with it into the atmosphere, which then grow in other places. Okay? Like a type of fungi might do. So there we are. The spiders of Mars. Plants, life forms, causing gases, scars on the surface, living organisms on Mars. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you soon.